Good morning, everyone. My name is Jon Ravitz. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for the Business Council of Westchester. On behalf of Dr. Marsha Gordon, our President and CEO, I want to welcome you to our webinar on diversity, equity, and inclusion in practice. Inclusion of different voices in the workplace continues to enrich organizations, making them stronger and more effective. Today, we're going to hear from leaders from some of Westchester's top companies, as well as from diversity, inclusion, and equity professionals on how this has impacted their workplaces for the better and what lessons they've learned. We could not do this program without the help of our sponsors, and we want to thank our sponsors this morning: Acceleration Guru, Balancing Life Issues, Con Edison, Cuddy and Feder LLP, Empire City Casino, Heineken USA, KeyBank, and Westchester Magazine. And as we have always strived to do with the Business Council of Westchester, we want to bring, as I said earlier, the experts to you. And we have an incredible panel to talk about this issue this morning. And I'd just like to introduce each one of them. Melissa G. Andrieux, Esquire. She is the Chief Diversity Officer, Client Relations Officer for Dorf Nelson LLP. Jon Dorf, the Managing Partner of Dorf and Nelson LLP, and also a board member of the Business Council of Westchester. Tamisha Chestnut, the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Ursuline School. Dr. Colleen Melnyk, the President of the Ursuline School. Freddimir Garcia, Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Officer for the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors. Richard Haggerty, the Chief Executive Officer for the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors. Michelle Nichols, the Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer and Director of Community Development for PCSB Bank, and Joseph Roberto, who is the Chairman of the Board and President and Chief Executive Officer of PCSB Bank. Thank you all for taking time out to lend your expertise to this webinar. For those of you who are watching today, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We are going to have a very robust and lively discussion. We will try to get to folks' questions, but if we don't get to everyone's questions, please contact the BCW and we will reach out to our panelists to get the answers to the questions that you've asked. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be on the Business Council of Westchester's business resource page and our Facebook page. So for many of you, if you have colleagues who were not able to tune in this morning, please direct them to both those sites so they can watch this program. We're really lucky at the Business Council of Westchester because we have our own in-house expert, and that's Ivette Molina, who is our Director of Business Management and Operations. In this role, she keeps the BCW headquarters operating smoothly and makes sure that member opportunities and requests are facilitated efficiently. Ivette most recently completed her Master's of Science in Human Resource Management and Labor Relations at the New York Institute of Technology in January of 2018, and she received her Bachelor of Business Administration from Berkeley College in 2008. It's my pleasure to turn the program over to our moderator this morning, Ivette Molina.
Good morning to all. Thank you, Jon, for your kind words. It's an absolute pleasure to be moderating this morning's panel. As the Business Council of Westchester Director of Business Management and Operations, I take great pride in continuously building an inclusive culture that encourages, supports, and celebrates the diverse voices of not only our employees, but our members as well. We recognize that diversity, inclusion, and equity are fundamental growth drivers across all industries. And so we are pleased to continue hosting our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series with distinguished panels such as today's to cover best practices, resources, and guidance on important issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And on that note, let's dive right into it. I would like to begin with Melissa. Melissa, how did you find yourself leading or serving in diversity, equity, and inclusion at your organization, or did it find you?
Good morning, Ivette. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the question. It was actually a combination of both. I'm a practicing attorney, and I came to a point in my career where I was looking for something additional and a little bit more meaningful. And coincidentally, Jon Nelson and Jon Dorf, they were thinking of formalizing their DEI programs, and unbeknownst to me, they were creating a new position within the firm. So after giving it some thought, I went to them, I approached them and I said, look, guys, I want to do something more within the firm, something that is more important, more meaningful to me, and will enrich the firm. And they said, Melissa, we're actually thinking of creating a diversity professional position within the firm. And after a little bit of back and forth, them convincing me whether this was the right move for me, we decided that this was a position that I would take on. And, the thinking is diversity, equity, and inclusion doesn't just happen. It's something that you have to work for, that you have to actually go about and do it. So, one of the first things that we did is I came up with the Diversity and Inclusion Council. I said to them, look, we have diversity within the firm. Let's convene a council and talk to everybody within the firm and see what's going on in their lives and what's going on in the community, so that we can come up with different policies and initiatives that will enrich the firm as well as the community. So, and I also said to them, we need buy-in from leadership. This is something that in order for it to happen, the council has to operate independently. And then when we come up with initiatives or suggestions, the executive committee must listen. And of course, they agreed. So we came up with this council. I chair it. We meet regularly. We come up with suggestions. And, it's something that has really benefited not only the firm, but our clients, because, when you get together with people, you get their ideas, diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, and it just brought a better understanding of the individuals at the firm. And that's something that we brought to our clients, and, we've gotten some positive feedback, and it's something that, it really worked, and it's something that we will continue to work on. It's not a one and done, and it's something that is really positive. And when you get positive feedback from not only the employees and the people in the community, when they try to understand what you're doing at your company, and then they try to emulate that, that's the best type of reward that you can get. So that's kind of how I found myself into this role.
Thank you, Melissa, for sharing your story. Freddie, would you like to chime in?
Sure. So I think for me, kind of like many of us, kind of when we start DEI work, it's kind of, you've been, at least I think I should say for some of us, you get kind of be pointed out. So I didn't go into my career after college saying I wanted to be a DEI officer. It was an opportunity that was, kind of came up and was presented to me for a chance to kind of be able to kind of dive into this work. And I started, similar to Melissa, leading a council. And from there, I got a little bit more curious and went to workshops and conferences. And then I got a little bit more curious and read some books and got a little bit more curious and did some training. So over time, it's kind of been able to cultivate and culminate kind of where I am today. In terms of HGAR, I would say I found it because a little birdie told me to consider it. I was currently working in healthcare. I never worked in real estate before, but I've done DEI work for over 8 years now. And in my conversations with the organization, and particularly Richard Haggerty, my boss, it was very clear that this was something that they were passionate about and wanted to commit time, energy, and resources to. Let me also kind of point out that the organization had been doing diversity work through some of the members, some of the staff, community members. So there was something there already. And I think this was just an opportunity to solidify and bring the expertise to start to connect the dots. Maybe we're focusing too much on one thing and not another thing. Maybe we just don't have the concepts or the tools to bring in other folks into the conversation. And so I think, from my perspective, it was an opportunity, which I've done in previous roles, was to create from the ground up what DEI can look for an organization like HGAR. And so I think I'm actually just celebrating my 1 year anniversary at HGAR about 2 weeks ago. And I think we're making great progress. We created a DEI committee. We've kind of changed some policies. We're talking about governance, structural changes, and we're actually also doing our first DEI summit this summer in collaboration with a number of different real estate associations across the state in New Jersey. So very proud of what we've accomplished in a year, but we definitely have more work to do.
Thank you, Freddie, and congratulations on your anniversary. Colleen, you're up. What is the best advice for organizational leadership who are getting started with diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for this question, Ivette. I think leaders must acknowledge that the only way to cultivate diversity, equity, and inclusion in any organization is to publicly commit to the effort from the very top of the organization. And then they're going to have to take a number of action steps to incorporate DEI practices into all of their daily operations. So, for example, I think that one of the first steps must include auditing the organization and their people to really understand their needs. I think every organization has this desire to incorporate DEI and cultivate practices, but every organization is unique and they really need to understand their mission and their goals and their people to really figure out what their starting place is. They have to then, in my opinion, really establish the specific outcomes that they're trying to reach, and also identify what success looks like for them and the organization in order to be able to focus and leverage what is necessary to bring all those specific outcomes to life. So, for example, the outcomes that we have at the Ursuline School pertain not only to our employees, but certainly to our students. Leaders have to be the ones that are talking the talk and walking the walk and infusing DEI into every aspect of the organization. So one example that I think we all have in common is examining the hiring practices that we have in place. And then finally, this work, to quote Freddie, this is not a one and done, and Melissa said the same thing. These are iterative cycles of work that has to be done. And I think that the only other step that I think is really important to note at the beginning is to be consistent. Continue to set goals, continue to measure progress, and then continue to understand as you hit certain goals, you're going to establish new ones, and you're really going to follow this iterative cycle of DEI work over and over again to get to the larger stretch goals or outcomes that you want your organization to arrive at.
Thank you, Colleen. Now, Richard, what would be your advice?
I'm going to echo a lot of what Colleen said. You have to be intentional as an organization. We're a membership organization with about 13,000 members. We have volunteer leaders. We started looking hard at DEI in 2020, as did a lot of organizations in the wake of George Floyd's murder, the Black Lives Matter protests. And we realized as an organization, we had to take a closer look at the issues that affect our members. But we just didn't jump in the deep end of the pool. We created first a task force to look at this, and they developed a roadmap. And you need to really have that intentional roadmap where you set those goals, as Colleen said. And we hired an outside consultant who specializes in the space. And they came out with about 5 actionable items that they took to our governance, our board of directors, and our board of directors approved all of those recommendations. It included creating a standing DEI committee. It included creating a position that's now occupied by Freddie, which we're extremely happy about, as a DEI officer. They authorized a survey of the entire membership, a diversity survey, basically asking about the demographic background of every single member. And we had pretty good success. We had about 10% of our members respond to that survey, which was an extensive survey. So you really need to create that roadmap so you know where you're going. And it's got to be measurable goals. A lot of people are saying we want a DEI officer, we want a DEI committee. But first you've got to figure out why. What do you want to achieve? And you want to make sure, just as Colleen said, that you've got those measurable goals. And they're going to, once you achieve those goals, you're going to create new goals. This is an evolving process, but it has to be intentional.
Thank you, Richard, for your insight. Now I would like to pose the next question to Michelle. With everything, there are difficulties. What would you say have been or are some of the most difficult aspects of implementing diversity and inclusion programs?
Good morning. Good morning, Ivette, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for your question. Let me start off by saying that diversity is beautiful. Inclusion is beautiful, right? That's just the reality. DEI is a need. When we think about this work and we think about the importance of it, of course, there's going to be challenges. But what do we do when we face challenges? We think about solutions. We think about the next steps. That's the reality. The first thing that I would say is one of the most common is the lack of the buy-in from leadership. We heard that already. Once you have the leadership buy-in, everything else seems to flow. When you start with the buy-in from leadership, like what we have here at PCSB Bank, I will tell you that everything runs. So when you think about the resistance of employees, of course, if an employee is feeling as though they do not belong, they haven't felt as though they belong, that's one of the things that having leadership buy-in helps. I think Colleen mentioned the consistency. If you're going to put a program together and you're just doing it to check a box, you're not really impacting the conversation. Here we go again, having leadership buy-in so that the programs are not just a simple Band-Aid. They're part of your DNA. And then when we think about implementation, one of the things that we did here at PCSB before we did anything, and I think, Richard, you mentioned it, is let's have a conversation. That inclusion aspect, ask the questions. It's one thing for you to just go ahead and put things in place, but if you didn't ask anybody, if you didn't ask the thoughts, and it's not just about the demographics in terms of race, but it's the conversation. What do you like? What don't you like? What are some of the things that you believe can be improved? What were some of the successes? What are some of the things that you think we should implement? Is it a mentorship program? Is it a sponsorship program? Being true and real and intentional and authentic. Those are some of the things, those are some of the key areas. When you do things like that, it helps you with dealing with challenges. So let me say it again. Focus on leadership inclusion, meaning leaders buy in. You start there. The resistance will happen, we know that. But when you have leadership buy-in, it helps. The other area is implementation. Ensure that when you're thinking about implementing anything, that you're having an inclusive conversation with your staff, and then be consistent. Do not make it a one and done. It's not a one size fits all. Diversity, inclusion is beautiful. We do it right here at PCSB Bank. We're committed. You can do it too. Thanks, Yvette.
Thank you, Michelle, for your words. This leads to my next question. Joe, what steps do you believe are critical for leaders to take with respect to building inclusion into the DNA of their corporate culture?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Yvette. I'll echo a little bit of what everyone has discussed before you got to me. But I think the first step you take is sending a message to your workforce that you as a leader of your company have the desire to build a diverse culture and a culture of belonging. And for us at PCSB, it was adding to our senior management team. And that individual is Michelle Nicholas, whose sole responsibility was to be our Chief Diversity Officer and Director of Community Development, reporting directly to the CEO. What that does is send a message to your staff that you are serious about it and it is a priority. I would think you follow that up, you listen. Michelle talked a little bit about it. You go through a process of interviewing your staff, finding out what's important to them, what they like about their job, what they like about the company, but also what they may not like about, their job and the company itself. You find out what interests do they have inside and outside of the job. So you put together a scorecard, and Michelle is the architect for this at PCSB. You listen, you put together a scorecard, and you will find that there are common concerns among the staff, and you will find commonality in the things that they like or the things they don't like. People will be honest. They will share their thoughts with you, positive and negative, if they think you care about it. And I think you follow that up. You have to react to those results and determine what is the best way to address their concerns. As an example, we found that one of the most common suggestions had to do in improving communication from the top down, knowing more about the company, along with more interaction with the senior management team. And we think about what is the best way of creating that improved communication. And one of the things we did at PCSB was put together a monthly newsletter in which we can communicate to our staff our desire to build a culture of belonging. With that newsletter, you recognize achievements, milestones, for example, Employee of the Month, highlighting senior staff, letting others in your workforce know a little bit more about the leadership team, what they're interested in, what their hobbies are, a little bit of their background. It gets them to understand you a little better. We talk about what our hobbies are. And then you use that newsletter to promote interest in affinity groups. And I'll tell you that when we started the process of putting together affinity groups, I wasn't sure how our workforce was going to get involved. I said, well, are they going to get involved or are they not? And boy, was I surprised how much they did get involved. But you don't know this unless you listen and you go through this process. So, and once you've gotten past that step 3, I think you just continue on with your goal of keeping that cultural belonging continuing. And, I find that, I've mentioned this a few times to my leadership, that young people today want to work for companies that believe in the same thing that they do. And it's no different for the customers of PCSB. They want to do business with a company that believes in the same thing that they do. So I will end it there, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk about the steps that we have taken, but I think it's steps that everyone else can take in building their DEI culture in their company.
Thank you, Joe, for your insight. Now I would like to ask Tamisha, how do you identify and work with diversity, equity, and inclusion advocates at your workplace?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm hoping you can hear me. I was experiencing excellent. We're starting off the morning on the good foot. So thank you for having me. So first and foremost, I must say that our chief DEI advocate is Dr. Melnyk, the president of the Ursuline School. Our commitment to DEI is guided by the principles of our core mission and core values here at Ursuline. So fostering a diverse school population of students and adults, and teaching the skills, modeling the behaviors, providing the resources, and cultivating an environment of inclusion that affirms all perspectives and backgrounds within our community. I come from a different perspective because I'm at a school. We also have a DEI commitment statement that clearly outlines and reaffirms our core institutional values. So whether you're joining as a new faculty member or as an incoming student, our commitment is clear. regarding our commitment to this work. As a member of Ursuline's leadership team, I work very closely with different constituents throughout our school. So, our principal, I work side by side with her regarding our DEI-focused student programming, and also with our admissions department and advancement and department chairs and students and parents and alumni. So I have the advantage of, working with the different, everyone within our community, which, certainly is a wonderful experience for all involved. So, again, whether introducing students to innovative and culturally rich experiences, both within and outside of the classroom, or partnering with admissions to update our student application to include our commitment to non-discrimination, or introducing student feeder programs that have scholastically exceptional BIPOC students, or in partnership with our advancement department as a member of the scholarship committee, hosting events with alumni and current student scholarship recipients. We just recently hosted a cultural appreciation event that was student-led. So it was an opportunity to celebrate differences within our Ursuline community, and certainly, throughout the world. This was, again, a student-led program. They are extremely engaged in this work. I also partner with communications to ensure that we are marketing and, from a public relations standpoint, that our messaging is clearly aligned to our mission. So DEI plays an active role, a vital role, and is embedded into the fabric of the Ursuline community.
Thank you, Tamisha. I'll be moving on to my next question for Jon. What initiatives do you have in place to ensure diversity in hiring?
Good afternoon, or actually good afternoon, good morning. That's how fast the day goes. And Ivette, thank you for including me. It's an honor to sit with these panelists and to hear what these different organizations are doing in the leadership. It is very heartening, and I'm very pleased to participate this morning. Much of what has been said, I will echo. I think diversity is a word, but to be diverse is an action, and it's a step that we all need to take. As to your question, Ivette, as to initiatives, as a law firm here in Westchester County, we have to be very proactive and very engaged and very forward-leaning in order to create a diverse workforce. And really, one of the fundamental ways to do that is that when we go out and interview candidates, we really try to ensure that we have a diverse pool of candidates. That's where it starts, because if the target isn't broad and wide and diverse in nature, then you are left with a selection process that isn't going to give you the results that one would want when it comes to diversity. So I think that's a great starting place, broad and wide, with respect to the pool of candidates for whatever the position may be. In addition to that, thanks to Melissa and her terrific efforts here at Dorf and Nelson, we have established a diversity and inclusion council, and that council works within our organization and talks to the people within the organization, getting new ideas and fresh ideas and new concepts that we can talk about, and ultimately many of those concepts and ideas are deployed. I would also add that when hiring, we look to cast a very wide net. That includes a diversity of law schools, a diversity of contacts, a diversity of centers of influence. It's not just advertising on Indeed, which we do, but it's far broader and it's far more purposeful, so that we can achieve the results that we are looking to achieve when it comes to diversity. Bar associations and like associations and trade groups that are diverse in nature too, or organizations and institutions that we look towards and look at and work with. And lastly, I would conclude by saying that we take what we call an open-mindedness approach. Very open, not just looking at the four corners of a resume, but looking at the person and looking at the experience and looking at the characteristics and looking at their life's journey. so that ultimately we can create not only a winning team, but a diverse team. That's really the successful combination and really one of the hallmarks of success. So on that note, again want to thank everyone, and Ivette, thank you for putting this together, John and Marcia, and it's an honor to serve on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Now I would like to pose the final question to both the DEI officers and employers. Has there been culture evolution at your organization? And if so, please share.
So I'll just
Go for it.
I'm gonna. So I would say yes, but there's a big but. And I'm gonna pass it over to Richard, because I think he can certainly speak to that a little bit more. I think within the first year that I've been there, I think we have seen change, cultural changes on how we make decisions. I think that's been important in terms of developing process and expectations. I also think in the ways in which we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. As you know, in real estate, fair housing dominates the conversation, and how realtors do their work, and what you should and shouldn't do in your work. And I think we're starting to migrate in terms of having conversations about the interactions with each other, the interactions with our community, and the relationships we build with one another. And again, the reason why I think Richard, and I know he doesn't mind me putting him on the spot, is because he's been involved with the organization for a long time, right? And he's seen HCR grow from a few thousand members to now over 14,000 members. And who's better to talk about culture shift than the guy leading the organization? So Richard, if you may.
So, thanks, Freddie. Thanks for putting me on the hot seat. Yeah, I think we have seen a cultural revolution. I think at HJAR, we were lucky to have diverse leadership, and that diverse leadership has continued. Right now, my current leadership team are all either people of color or identify as LGBT. That's pretty rare. And I think that when you look at what kind of message that sends to the membership, the message is one of inclusion. Well, you know, I can see myself in a leadership role because I'm looking at the individuals who were involved in leading the organization. So I think you've always got to be very aware of messaging. And I think that our messaging has definitely improved. We're especially with Freddie's help, we're much more careful with our messaging to make sure it's inclusive. I've got to give, first thing I would suggest is if you hire a DEI officer, listen to them. And I definitely listen to Freddie because he comes from a different perspective than I come from oftentimes. And he's the one who's actually put a lot of our processes in place. And I think those processes internally have really helped create that cultural shift that I have seen in the last year. And I think we also have to be willing to have difficult conversations. And have to have a little bit thicker skin. I'm noticing that I think every CEO on this Zoom is white, and every DEI officer is a person of color. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, except the messaging that may send. And that's not going to be something that changes overnight, but I think that we have to look at the dynamics and figure out, well, how can we get more people of color involved at that CEO level, as well as other levels in the organization. So it's a process, as Freddie keeps on telling me, it's a process. The work has to be done. It's not going to happen overnight, but be willing to do the hard work and quite candidly be willing to upset some people and be willing to upset the apple cart every once in a while, because if you're not doing that, you're probably not going to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Richard and Freddie. Michelle, I believe you wanted to chime in.
So I'll say this, right? The reality is that we can't spend the time talking about it. We have to be about it. Joe talked about what he needed, and I got hired. We started the work ensuring that we're having the conversations, with the staff, with everybody. And then we put a plan together. What that evolution looked like and looks like is within the last 10 months. He shared already some of the things that we've already done, whether it's newsletter, employee of the month. The reality is that if you are going to talk about it, you have to be about it, you have to do it. That's the evolution, moving from step 1 to step 2 and keep going, right? And ensuring that along the way, you're doing check-ins, ensuring that along the way that you're having intentional, authentic, and real conversations. Because diversity, inclusion, the lack of that is missed opportunity. And if you want to ensure that your future, the organization's future, is successful, think of making it future-proof through diversity, equity, inclusion. And that's what we have been doing. That's how we've evolved to know that, we started off with without having employee affinity groups. And now it's the hot ticket. It's something that everybody's excited about. That says that we listened. That says that we incorporated. That says that we are moving forward, but it's going to take time. We just have to be consistent. And Joe knows he already knows I'm going to ask him to speak after me because it's a tag team. And again, it's about leadership. Joe?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And certainly, PCSB is a public company. And besides having a large customer base, we also have many shareholders. And, I listen to what the corporate world is telling you. There's regulations coming down, especially with public companies, that are saying that you have to look at your company and you have to start to think about DEI and incorporating that into your company. And the last thing that I would ever want to do is do something because somebody told me I had to do it. Because then you're not really serious about it. And for me, it was, no, I'm not going to wait until somebody tells me I have to do something. I'm going to do it because I believe in it. And I think it's the right thing to do, not only for our company, but for the customer base that we serve throughout 4 different counties. I keep in mind that in operating in 4 different counties in the Lower Hudson Valley, look how diverse that population is. And we operate in that diverse culture, which says to me that if I want to be a company leader, I have to respect the fact that I operate in a diverse culture and serve that community the best way I can. So bringing in Michelle to head our DEI effort was not just to check the box, as she said, but to truly put forward the fact that as a leader of a company, as a leader of a company in the Hudson Valley, we need to represent the population and diversity of that population in Westchester and become a leader. We, as a bank, and we're not we're still considered a community bank, but we can become a leader even as a community bank. Our competition are the money center banks. But if we can take that step and become a leader in addressing DEI in our community, it says a lot about the values of our company. And of course, we want our people that work for us to be our advocates. And if they like where they work, they believe that management is supporting their efforts, they will be advocates for your company, no question about it.
Thank you, Joe and Michelle. Melissa, you had your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to talk about the evolution of the firm. Long before I got to the firm, diversity, equity, and inclusion was in the DNA of the firm. Dorf and Nelson was an inclusive workplace. But once I got there and joined, I guess the C-suite, we'll call it, we sat down and we really came up with a plan to include the employees in everything that we're doing. And with the D&I council that we convened, I got to tell you, we got such positive feedback. The employees felt that they were actually heard. They appreciated the fact that management took the time to start this council and to include them in the discussions having to do with the firm, but also to talk about what's going on in their personal lives and what they see are is going on in their community. And they appreciate the fact that we welcome their ideas and that some of their ideas were actually implemented at the firm. And it's made the firm more congenial. I mean, with COVID, everybody was scattered about. And then with the start of the council, everybody felt included. They wanted to be at work. They wanted to take part in the initiatives. They wanted to take part in the get-togethers that we had. And it's just made the firm such like more of a family situation. People actually want to come to work. They want to talk to people. And that's one of the things that has made the firm evolve. And the other thing that I'll say is, I was asked to be on the hiring committee by Jon Dorf and John Nelson. And that's something else that has further evolved the firm because as we can see, I'm a person of color. I bring different ideas and perspectives to the hiring process. I could look at a resume and see one thing, whereas Jon Dorf and John Nelson see something else. And, you know, we talk about whether we should actually bring this candidate in. And I'll give an example. One of the candidates that we weren't too sure of, I said, you know what, I have a gut feeling on this person. Let's bring them in, let's interview them. And you know what? They turned out to be a great hire and they're still there right now. And it happened to be a diverse candidate. So you can't just look at the four corners of a resume, as Jon Dorf said. You have to actually take a step back, and we want to give everybody equal footing, give them an opportunity. That's all that people want in the world. And you know what? You never know. You might find a gem, somebody that you might have cast aside because of something that you find strange on their resume. You bring them in and it turns out that they're actually a very qualified candidate. So kind of open your eyes, be forward thinking, don't just, you know, evolve with the times. And that's what Dorf and Nelson has been doing. And, you know, it's been really successful, not only within the firm, but outside of the firm.
Thank you, Melissa. John, would you like to chime in on that?
Well, listen, Melissa is just been fantastic, and we're just so proud to have her in this leadership role. I would just, you heard Melissa use the word inclusion and included on multiple occasions, and you can't have diversity if you don't have inclusion. So I would just say that if diversity is a goal in your workforce, which I truly believe it should be, you have to focus on the inclusion piece. You have to bring people together and get input. With that will sprout up the roots for diversity. So it really in many ways starts with inclusion, and that brings you the opportunity, the great opportunity to have a diverse workforce and workplace.
Okay, Tamisha, would you like to say it?
Yes, hi. So has there been cultural evolution at within this organization? And my answer would be yes. We were intentional. Dr. Melnyk and I were intentional this year about focusing on cultural appreciation. And what comes with cultural appreciation? Cultural understanding. So commemorative months was one of the key areas of focus for us this year. And as I mentioned previously, students are ready. Students are asking the questions. They are ones who are quite inquisitive and they are quite informed. We believe in development of the whole student. And we know that in order for these students to be successful, they need to have an understanding of cultural differences, be it religious affiliation, be it socioeconomic background, and certainly as it relates to ethnicity as well. But that has been our focus for this year, cultural understanding. And I believe that that is the way to move forward, to move the DEI efforts forward as it relates to the Ursuline School. Next year, our plan is to really take a deeper dive into having, some of those more difficult, uncomfortable conversations, but we were intentional about making sure that cultural understanding, cultural appreciation was the focus of this year.
Thank you, Tamisha. Dr. Melnyk, would you like to provide your insight?
Yeah, I would just like to reiterate what Tamisha shared, that our students are ready. They're very curious about each other. They're very open to each other. This is a very diverse group of students who are curious about how they each operate in the world. And our focus on student experience means that we want them to appreciate each other and understand each other's differences. But then the other piece of that is our faculty and staff. And there's a phrase that if you can know and teach one student, you can know and teach the world. And what that means, it's really a way of talking about cultural responsive pedagogy. If you really truly know the students in front of you, you know who they are, what their backgrounds are, what their experiences and needs are, you can be successful in teaching and reaching all of them. And so our next steps next year, as Tamisha was indicating, is really to do a deeper dive into pedagogy, into our data. What is the data telling us about our students and their success, their success and achievement? But we also are looking at our employees. What do our adults need? What kind of support do we need to bring here to help them develop a deeper understanding, shared language, and participation in the culture, the inclusive culture that we're building? And the other thing that I just want to repeat is, Michelle, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Diversity is beautiful.
Thank you, Dr. Melnyk. And thank you so much to the DE officers and employers for addressing such an important topic. And thank you to the Business Council of Westchester for giving me the opportunity to moderate this panel. And I will second that diversity and inclusion is beautiful. Now I'll pass it along to Jon, who will be addressing all the questions in the chat.
Thank you very much, Ivette, and thank you for moderating into our panel. This has been a really exciting conversation. Just a few questions. We're going to be mindful of people's times, but we do have a few questions from folks. And again, for those questions that don't get answered, we will make sure that we get your questions out to our panel. As a diverse-owned firm, I'd like to ask how you're helping to implement supplier diversity within your company beyond the database registration. So I don't know who wants to tackle that, or if a few people want to chime in.
I'll tackle that. Yeah, besides doing an inventory of your suppliers or your providers to determine what level of diversity you have with regards to that, that's one thing to do. But the next thing you really have to do is promote that you as a company are looking to diversify your both supplier and provider list, if you want to call it. So what we did was we put it out on our website. We redesigned our website to have a landing page in which we're seeking out companies, diverse companies, to let us know that they would be interested in working with us on a supplier side. And it gives us an opportunity to look at dealing with providers and suppliers more locally than, I'll say, globally, because sometimes you never know in your own backyard where you can get your suppliers from. And certainly through our efforts through our website, we are finding that, hey, there are companies in our backyard that we should be dealing with, and they are diverse companies. And it was one way for us to try to diversify more our supplier and provider network.
Thank you, Joe. Anyone else want to take on this question? Yes.
Yeah, John. So we are in the beginning stages of having those conversations at HGAR. But one of the things that I do want to know in ways in which we will be trying to address supply diversity is creating a process of selection. I think, for a small organization like us, we've been, kind of working amongst kind of similar folks and people who have been doing great work, but we tend to tap into them once or twice or three times, right? And so how do we now expand and open those doors for other people to have those conversations with us around, supporting our website or catering an event or being a videographer for one of our commercials, right? And so if we think about it in all those different ways, right? Supply diversity can mean a lot of different things, where we host events, where we go out, right? And we host an event for our membership, whether it's a happy hour to an educational session, et cetera. And so I think we want to think about supply diversity from all those different aspects and then create a process in how people can know of the opportunities, but even more importantly, the process in how we decide on who we go with. Is it price? Is it location? Is it services, right? The criteria, the same way you do hiring practices, right? You create a process that is consistent, that is clear, and allow everyone to participate along the way in that process. So again, I say process a lot because I think process and policy fix a lot of the issues I think that we we have mentioned today. And so process and policy are at the core of doing this right.
Thank you very much.
Process is Freddie's favorite word.
It's a good one. This next question could take probably up another hour. So I'm going to ask anyone who does want to take it, and we love to hear from as many of the panel as possible, just to be mindful of that. How have you specifically changed your recruiting practices? Where are you sourcing diverse talent? And how does that differ from your previous recruitment and hiring practices?
So I'll chime in real quick. That's because we've created processes. Freddie's created processes. If I had a new job position, I oftentimes would say, Jon Ravitz would be the perfect person for this new job. And when I say that now, Freddie says, then Jon Ravitz can apply for it and go through the same process that everybody else will go through. So that's really the key. And I want to also kind of reinforce what Melissa said. Freddie and our COO is involved in all of the initial screening and the initial interviews. And that sends a message because Freddie also weaves in DEI into the conversations. And I think that that's been very much appreciated by a lot of folks who have interviewed with HGAR. So it's really about consistency in processes and sticking to the process.
Anybody else want to chime in?
I'd like to jump in and say that, first of all, we're very lucky to have Tamisha as part of the Ursuline School because she has a deep corporate background. Before Tamisha worked in schools, she was working at Morgan Stanley and a number of other Fortune 500 firms. She was the one who really raised my attention to this whole idea of process, and looking at procedures and policies. And Freddie, you'd be very happy to know that she's having the same conversations with me. We just conducted a very large search. And rather than look at tried and true, resources or places to advertise, we looked widely to get as many resumes as possible. And she was really an integral part of the screening process before we then went to our full search process. And so I think the more diverse people you include on your panel, the more perspectives you're going to bring to that whole process in itself.
I would just echo what Dr. Melnyk has said. I think casting a wide net is critically important. It's very easy to go back to the same places, to look at the same candidates and make very similar hires. It's a lot harder to look out into the horizon, with a much broader view. But I do truly believe that if employers do that, the results will speak for themselves, and they'll be in a much better position in the short term as well as in the long term.
Well, thank you all very much for this. You know, what's so exciting about being part of the Business Council of Westchester is that we have members like all of you who quite simply walk the walk and talk the talk on this very important evolving issue. And at the Business Council of Westchester, we're going to continue to make diversity and equity inclusion one of our continuing top priorities to make sure that we're getting the most updated information out to our members and get their feedback and get their input as well, because so many of them are doing what you all are doing as well. So again, I want to thank our great panel this morning. Joseph Roberto, Chairman of the Board and President and CEO of PCSB Bank. Michelle Nicholas, the Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer and Director of Community Development for the PCSB Bank. Richard Haggerty, the Chief Executive Officer for the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors. Freddimir Garcia, the Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Officer for the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors. Dr. Colleen Melnyk, the President of the Ursuline School. Tamisha Chestnut, the President of Diversity of the Equity and Inclusion at the Ursuline School. Jon Dorf, the Managing Partner of Dorf and Nelson. And Melissa Andrieux, the Chief Diversity Officer, Client Relations Officer for Dorf and Nelson. Again, for all of you who have tuned in, please know that this program has been recorded and will be on the BCW's business resource page and our Facebook page. A special thanks to Ivette Molina, who is our Director of Business Management and Operations, for doing a great job moderating this panel. And again, to our sponsors, Acceleration Guru, Balancing Life Issues, Con Edison, Cuddy and Feder LLP, Empire City Casino, Heineken USA, Key Bank, and Westchester Magazine. Thank you for your ongoing support. For all of you tuning in, have a great day. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.